Hello and welcome. I have finally got my hands on an instrument that I've been trying to hunt down for a number of years, and it is this, the Trombonium. This is an instrument that was made by King Musical Instruments, which was previously known as the H.N. White Company, and this instrument has the distinction of being the last instrument that H.N. White ever designed before he died. It was made from around the 1930s to the 1970s, and it is very similar to an instrument that I reviewed a little while ago, which is the Altonium. So this is the slightly smaller brother. It's in the key of F. Many people have issues with the way I pronounce F, but it's in the key of F, and it has a fixed bell, whereas the Trombonium is in the key of B flat, and it has a bell with a collar, so we can rotate the bell around to annoy the person of your choosing. The Trombonium was designed for a number of purposes, one of which was marching bands. So the idea was that you could have an instrument that produced the same sound as a trombone, but didn't take up all that physical room. There are a few interesting things about this instrument. For starters, you've got a third valve tuning slide that you can adjust from the top and from the bottom. Which is kind of cool if you ever needed to adjust your third valve by a ridiculous amount. It only has one water key. Because the bore of the instrument is so narrow, i.e. the tubing is so narrow, it doesn't take a lot of water inside the instrument before you start getting gurgling noises. And because you've only got that one water key, you're going to do the whole instrument rotation routine in order to clear it. It's a little bit of an annoyance. The other thing that I want to mention is the springs that push the valves up, these are bottom sprung valves, have got this large section at the bottom which fits in around the top of the bottom of the valve casing. So the spring is actually pinned in place by the bottom valve cap. So if you were to take your valve out for whatever reason, the spring remains stuck in place. I've never seen that before. It's an interesting thing as far as my knowledge and experience goes. A lot of the advertising material that I've seen for this instrument mentions the fact that one of the problems that it solves compared to a valve trombone is better intonation. That's not actually what my experience with this instrument shows. There are a few notes that are a little bit more out of tune than what I would expect to see. However, there are alternate fingerings that you can use to rectify those issues, so it's not an insurmountable problem like it has been on some very, very awful instruments that I have reviewed in the past. The Trombonium was killed off by the H.N. White / King Musical Instruments Company in the 1970s, not before Consalma had a go at making their own version of the Trombonium, which they ingeniously called a Trombonium. However, outside of the US, it's hard to find any sources that talk about them catching on at all. And one of the reasons perhaps for that is that in Europe and Britain and parts of the Commonwealth that Britain invaded and so forth, we use a thing called a sax horn. This is a variant of the sax horn called the baritone in Commonwealth circles, or in Europe it's called a Tenerhorn. It's effectively the same instrument, but its bell points straight up instead of pointing straight forward. It has the valves on the top instead of on the front, and it's not quite so cylindrical. See, the Trombonium is very small in terms of proportions. The tubing stays a very similar diameter throughout pretty much all of the instrument until we start getting back to the bow that goes down and leads to the bell section. It's pretty much entirely cylindrical. Whereas the baritone, or this particular version of the sax horn, is not as cylindrical. It's a little bit more conical, but still in the context of a brass band, this is considered a cylindrical instrument. So there are the differences between what we shall call the European contribution versus the United States contribution. I personally, having played this a lot and the Trombonium a little, very much prefer the baritone. It's it's a lot more reassuring to play. It's a bit more comfortable to hold, in my opinion. But what I'll do is play both for you so you can get some idea of what you think.